Have you ever stumbled across something so out of place, so quietly shocking, that it changes you before you even realize? Imagine walking into your high-rise office at midnight, expecting silence, and instead finding two little girls, black twins, quietly scrubbing your marble floors as if they belonged to the shadows. That's exactly what happened to Silas Hart, the man who built a billion-dollar empire but never let anyone close enough to know the loneliness inside his penthouse walls. Silas was the kind of CEO whose name inspired whispers at boardroom tables. Genius, ruthless, untouchable. But late at night, away from the flashing cameras and ambitious executives, he wandered his own office halls in silence, haunted by a heaviness he could never admit. It was another restless night when he stepped out of his private elevator and saw the light on under the frosted glass of his top-floor suite. A tiny anomaly, the kind that would have annoyed him on any other night. He almost didn't notice the quiet scraping sounds at first. Maybe that's why he stood frozen in the hallway for so long, his mind juggling business crises, not expecting a mystery. But when he eased the door open, the sight before him snapped every tired thought away. There, crouched in matching worn-out jeans and oversized yellow cleaning gloves, were two small girls. One dragged a heavy mop in careful arcs across the marble, eyes narrowed in concentration. The other, her knees red from scrubbing, clutched a battered sponge as if it was the most important tool in the world. Their hair was neatly braided, though a few wisps had escaped, and both wore scuffed rain boots, one pink, one blue. Neither seemed startled to see him. It was the quiet, unafraid way they looked at him that threw Silas off most. He cleared his throat, as much to steady himself as to announce his presence. "You girls lost?" His voice came out harsher than he intended. The one with the sponge looked up first, dark eyes big and calm. "We're working," she answered simply. Her twin echoed the motion, but with a flicker of wariness. "My aunt is the cleaning lady," said the girl with the mop. "She lets us help sometimes. It's easier if we do it together." For a long moment, Silas just stared. He'd dealt with union reps and angry shareholders. He'd rescued failing companies and crushed competitors. But this quiet resilience, made him feel completely unprepared. "Does your aunt know you're here now?" he asked, lowering himself to their level. They exchanged a glance. "She's somewhere in the building. Sometimes she lets us start so she can finish faster," said the first girl. "We won't make a mess." Silas tried to process the rules of their world. He'd spent his life building systems, imposing order, keeping chaos at bay with policies and protocols. But here were two little girls, matter-of-factly cleaning his office in the dead of night. Not afraid, not asking for anything. Just surviving. "How old are you?" "Almost 8, said the one with the mop. 7 3/4, added her sister, with the tiniest hint of pride. "You shouldn't be here," Silas said, his tone softening despite himself. "It's not safe. Where do you sleep when you're not helping your aunt?" Again, that look, so much older than any child should be. "Sometimes in the back closet, sometimes in the car. But we're good. We don't bother anyone." He was about to call security to find their aunt, to hand them off to someone else, anything but this impossible feeling rising in his chest, when the door to the staff break room banged open. A tired woman in her 40s hurried in, keys jangling, eyes wide with panic. "Celine! Aria! What are you—" She froze when she saw Silas, her face draining of color. "Sir, I'm so sorry. They just—" Silas held up a hand. "You're their aunt." She nodded, dropping the mop bucket with a clatter. "Please, Mr. Hart, don't call anyone. I know they shouldn't be here, but I had no one to watch them. My sister, she's in rehab. The girls stay with me on my late shifts. I keep them close so I can keep them safe." Silas watched the woman, her hands shaking, the lines of exhaustion around her mouth. She wore the company uniform, her name stitched in blue, Clarice Bowen. "I'm not here to punish anyone," Silas said quietly, surprising himself with the truth of it. "But you understand, this isn't right. They're children." Clarice nodded, tears threatening. "It's not forever. I just need a little more time. I promise, they don't get in the way." The girl shrank behind her, Suddenly, children again. Celine clung to her aunt's sleeve. Aria tucked the sponge behind her back, as if hiding the evidence would make them invisible. Silas hesitated. He'd made 1,000 impossible choices for his company, always picking logic over emotion. But looking at these three, tired, frightened, hopeful, he realized there were some decisions that had nothing to do with business. "Come with me," he said finally. "All of you. Let's find somewhere warm for tonight." There's a strange power in kindness when it's least expected. Clarice nodded, relief and terror flickering across her face. The girls followed, silent but trusting, as Silas led them down the private elevator and out into the crisp, pre-dawn city. The drive to his brownstone felt surreal. Celine, curled up on the back seat, finally let herself yawn. Arya fell asleep, her head on her sister's shoulder. Sponge still clutched like a talisman. Clarice tried to apologize, to explain, but Silas just shook his head. "Tomorrow we'll talk," he said. "Tonight let them rest." He found spare sheets and blankets. The guest room, barely used, became a sanctuary. The girls didn't question the softness of the bed or the warmth of the room. They just settled in, eyes wide, whispering to each other as if afraid it might all disappear. Downstairs, Clarice stared at her mug of tea, hands trembling. "I'm not a bad person," she whispered. Life got harder than I thought." Silas, who had spent years locking up his own pain in offices and empty penthouses, just nodded. "Life does that sometimes." The city was waking up outside, but inside his house there was a rare hush. Silas watched the two girls sleep, the first light of dawn painting gentle shadows on their faces. He realized then that the story he'd walked into wasn't just about two children cleaning floors. It was about the invisible weight carried by the ones we overlook, the quiet heroes, the exhausted guardians, the children who learn to be invisible because the world only notices them when something goes wrong. And, in that moment, something inside Silas Hart began to change. Personal reflection. You know, sometimes the smallest acts of compassion can shift the trajectory of a life. Silas had all the power in the world, but it was only when he looked beyond his own pain and status that he saw the real strength in others. I think we all need that reminder. You never know whose story you might be walking into, or what your kindness might unlock. Sunrise in the city always carried a kind of hope, sharp, golden, impossible to ignore. But that morning in Silas Hart's house, the hope felt tentative, like a flame held in cupped hands. Celine and Arya awoke in the same bed, half tangled in blankets, as if unsure if they were still allowed to be comfortable. Clarice, their aunt, barely slept. She spent most of the night perched in the hallway chair, staring at her phone screen, worried about missed calls and consequences. Silas, meanwhile, lay awake in his own room. He replayed every moment since last night. Those two girls, calm in their struggle, Clarice's guilt. He'd been raised to believe there were rules for everything, but he couldn't find the right page for what to do next. The housekeeper, Mrs. Jensen, was the first to notice. She nearly dropped her tray of croissants when she saw two children, black twins in borrowed pajamas, sitting politely at the kitchen island. Silas watched Mrs. Jensen's face go from confusion to surprise to something like understanding. "They're guests," he said simply. "Make sure they eat." Celine nudged a strawberry with her fork, then glanced up at her sister. Arya, always the braver one, took a tiny bite and waited. When Mrs. Jensen smiled and offered more, the girls allowed themselves to eat for real, slowly, carefully, but with growing confidence. Clarice arrived at breakfast, wringing her hands. "I'll find somewhere else for them tonight," she murmured to Silas, voice thick with fear. "I can't keep depending on you. My supervisor can't know I brought them here, and—" Silas cut her off gently. "No one needs to know the details right now. Let's figure out something better. Together." It was the first time in years he'd used that word, together, and meant it. But that morning, as the city outside returned to its manic routine, Clarice's phone buzzed with a message that turned her face pale. She stepped into the hallway to answer, voice lowered but urgent. Silas couldn't help but overhear, and what he picked up made the hair rise on his arms. "No, I can't take them tonight. Please, she's not ready. Yes, I know what I promised, but they're just kids. No, I said I'd get the money. No, don't call her. When Clarice returned, she saw Silas watching. For a second, her mask slipped, and what he saw underneath wasn't just exhaustion, but raw fear. He waited until the girls were in the living room, tracing the lines of a coloring book Mrs. Jensen had found, before asking softly, "Is someone threatening you, Clarice?" Clarice shook her head too quickly. "It's fine. Just trouble with my sister. She, she owes money. That's all. It's not your problem." Silas had seen enough deals fall apart to know when someone was hiding the truth, but he also knew when pushing too hard would shatter fragile trust. He didn't ask again. Instead, he did something rare for a man who thrived on control. He let the day unfold without a plan. The girls played in the garden that afternoon, hesitant at first, then bolder. Celine spun beneath the sycamore trees, her laughter cracking the icy shell that had formed around the house. Arya discovered the pond, watching goldfish dart beneath lily pads, her eyes soft with wonder. Silas, sitting on the back steps, marveled at how quickly children could change a space, not with noise, but with possibility. But every time Clarice's phone buzzed, she would step away, always anxious, always glancing over her shoulder. That unease settled over the house like a distant thunderstorm. It wasn't long before the first real test arrived. A knock at the door. Sharp, insistent, wrong for a quiet afternoon. Mrs. Jensen answered and returned, worried. "Mr. Hart, there's a woman outside. She says she's here for Clarice Bowen." Clarice went white. "She can't know I brought the girls here." Silas stepped to the foyer and found a woman standing there. Tall, with hard eyes, her posture both desperate and defensive. "I'm Maya," she said, without waiting for an introduction. "Clarice's sister. I want my girls." Clarice froze. "Maya, you can't just show up." Maya's gaze flickered past Clarice, landing on Silas, and then, more sharply, on Selene and Arya, who were peering down the hallway. "They don't belong here," Maya snapped. "You promised you'd keep them until I got on my feet, not dump them with strangers. You can't buy family, mister. You hear me?" Silas measured her. He could see the cracks in her bravado, the smudges under her eyes, the clench in her jaw. This was a woman who had been fighting battles alone for too long. "They're safe here," Silas said, voice calm but absolute. "You want to talk? Let's talk. But not in front of the girls." Maya didn't back down. "You don't know what it's like, being a black single mom in this city. You think a nice house fixes everything?" Silas met her eyes. "Number, I don't. But I know what it's like to be alone. And I know what it's like to want better for the people you love." Clarice put a gentle hand on her sister's arm. "Let's talk in the kitchen, please." The sisters disappeared behind closed doors. Silas waited, torn between respecting their privacy and his growing responsibility for the children in his house. Celine tugged his sleeve. "Are we in trouble?" He knelt to her level. "No, sweetheart. You're not in trouble. None of this is your fault." Arya blinked up at him. "Will we have to go back to the shelter?" Silas's heart squeezed tight. "Not if I can help it." In the kitchen, voices rose and fell. At one point, Maya sobbed, broken, angry, tired. Clarice's voice was a soft murmur. Silas caught fragments. "I can't take them tonight. You know I'm not ready." "But you said—" "I'm not giving them up, Maya. But they need more than either of us can give right now. Please." When the sisters finally emerged, Maya's eyes were red, but her voice was steadier. "I'm going," she told Clarice. "But only for tonight. Tomorrow I want to see them." "You promise me." Clarice nodded. "You have my word." Maya left without another word, barely looking at Silas. The front door closed with a final, echoing click. That night after dinner, Clarice sat with Silas in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a mug. "You want the truth?" she said quietly. "I don't think Maya can ever be the mom they need. But she's their mother. The system, it doesn't care if you love them, only if you're blood." Silas stared at the darkening sky through the window. He thought of all the times he'd built walls to protect himself, and how quickly a child's need could tear them down. "Do you want them to stay with you?" he asked. Clarice's shoulders sagged. "I want them to have a chance, to be more than just what life handed them. But I'm scared. I'm scared I'm not enough." Silas looked at the two girls, now curled up on the sofa, heads together, safe for now. Sometimes, he said, being enough just means showing up, again and again, even when you're scared. He meant it. In ways he'd never admitted to anyone, he was speaking about himself. Before bed, Silas checked on the girls. They'd arranged their things in neat little piles by the guest room door, socks folded, shoes lined up, a single battered teddy bear standing guard. "Do you want to stay here tomorrow too?" he asked, keeping his voice soft. Celine nodded, eyes wide. Arya hesitated, then whispered, "Can we stay if we help?" Silas shook his head. "You don't have to do anything to stay. Not clean, not earn it. You're just, allowed to be." That simple truth, something so many children never hear, settled in the room like a blessing. As Silas left, he heard them whispering, not about chores, but about dreams, school, books, a pet fish someday. It made him realize that hope, once planted, was almost impossible to kill. Night fell heavy, as if the city itself was holding its breath. For Silas Hart, sleep was a memory he couldn't recover. In the silent hours, he found himself pacing the hallways of his vast, immaculate house, passing by closed doors, quiet bedrooms, the living room where Celine and Arya had finally learned to let their laughter ring out. It would have been easy to pretend that the worst was over, that one act of kindness had wiped the slate clean. But Silas, for all his flaws, knew the world rarely granted such mercy. The next morning, the house filled with anxious energy. Celine and Arya dressed quietly, as if afraid that one wrong move would undo all the safety they'd found. Clarice looked haunted, every phone notification making her jump. Even Mrs. Jensen moved with a hush, as if waiting for something to break. And just after 10, it did. There was a knock at the door, this time not Maya, not a social worker, but a pair of uniformed officers. Clarice's face drained of all color. "Ms. Bowen?" one officer asked gently. "We've had a report of minors at risk. We'll need to speak with you and the children." Celine and Arya stood behind Silas, clutching each other's hands. It was in that moment, I believe, that every adult in the room realized the full, brutal weight of the system. The rules weren't written to save lives. They were written to keep the wheels turning, no matter who got caught underneath. The officers questioned Clarice. They questioned Silas. They asked to see the girls' belongings, asked them if they felt safe, if they had been hurt. Celine answered every question in whispers. Arya stared at the floor, speaking only when pressed. Silas found his voice steady, but inside his thoughts were a storm. He remembered his own childhood. Wealthy, yes, but cold and calculated, filled with contracts instead of comfort. No one had ever asked him if he was okay. No one had ever fought for him. When the officers finished, one of them knelt down to Celine and Arya's height. "Do you want to stay here?" she asked softly. Celine's eyes flicked to Silas, to Clarice, then back to her sister. "We feel safe. Can we please stay?" The officers exchanged glances, then quietly stepped outside to make their call. As the door closed, Clarice's knees gave out. She slumped into a chair and buried her face in her hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I shouldn't have brought you here. I thought maybe you'd be better off." Silas put a hand on her shoulder, firm and resolute. "Number you did the right thing. The world doesn't make it easy to do the right thing. But that's never a reason to stop." Celine crawled onto Clarice's lap and hugged her fiercely. Arya moved closer to Silas, her voice barely more than a breath. "Will they take us away?" "Not if I have anything to say about it," Silas promised. But as soon as the words left his mouth, the phone rang. It was Maya. "I know they called social services. They told me, 'Look, I'm coming. Don't let them go with strangers. Please, Silas, whatever you think of me, I'm still their mother.'" Silas closed his eyes, fighting down the surge of frustration. "I'm not the enemy, Maya, but you have to show up for them, not just today, but every day." Maya's voice trembled. "I'm trying. I swear I am." Within the hour, a caseworker arrived, a middle-aged man named Mr. Lyman, who wore his exhaustion in the lines of his face. He listened, asked questions, took notes. He was fair, but not warm. He spoke with Celine and Arya alone. He spoke with Clarice and Maya, who'd arrived at the last minute, out of breath, clutching a battered purse and apologies. He spoke with Silas, who offered not money, but his story, his willingness to testify, his belief that the girls deserved more than bureaucracy. In the end, Mr. Lyman said, "The process is in motion now. Maya, as their biological mother, you'll need to present evidence of stability, employment, housing, a support network. Clarice, as their aunt, you may file for guardianship if you wish. And Mr. Hart," he hesitated, "legally you have no claim, but I will note your support, your home environment, and your advocacy. No decision would be made today. The children could stay with Clarice temporarily as Maya worked through the system. Silas, meanwhile, was left in the painful role of protector without authority, a feeling he found more intolerable than any failed business deal. That night, Silas found Araya crying in the guest room, clutching her teddy bear. He sat beside her at a loss for words. "Why does it have to be so hard?" she whispered. He wished he had a better answer than the truth. "Sometimes grown-ups mess things up, but it's not your fault, and you are not alone. Not ever again." Celine slipped into the room holding a drawing she'd made. 3 stick figures holding hands, standing under a sun with long, wild rays. "Look," she said softly, "we're together." Clarissa, standing in the doorway, wiped her eyes. "You're not losing us. Not now. Not ever." But the next days blurred with fear and uncertainty. Maya attended every meeting, submitted her documents, worked double shifts at a bakery. Clarice filed her petition, terrified she'd be branded a traitor by her own family. Silas hired lawyers, not to fight for custody, but to fight for the girls' right to be heard. In the weeks that followed, the girls started school. The principal, a sturdy woman with salt and pepper braids, welcomed them with a warm smile and a knowing look. "If there's trouble, we call you first?" she asked Clarice. "You call all 3 of us," Silas insisted. Celine flourished, reading, drawing, making friends. Aria struggled at first, haunted by separation anxiety and nightmares. Every time she woke up afraid, Silas would sit at her bedside, reminding her that family was more than blood. It was who showed up in the morning and who stayed through the night. The court date arrived on a rainy Thursday. The courtroom felt cold and too large. The girls sat between Maya and Clarice. Silas sat behind them, hands knotted tight. Maya told her story of addiction, recovery, regret, and hope. Clarice told hers of years spent holding the family together and the agony of choosing between loyalty and the children's safety. Silas spoke last, not as a CEO, but as a witness. He talked about what he'd seen. 2 children who had learned to be invisible, to clean up their own existence so as not to burden anyone. He spoke about the courage it took to hope, to ask for nothing but a place to sleep and a chance to belong. When the judge called Selena and Arya to speak, there was a hush. Selena squeezed Arya's hand. "We just want to stay with people who want us, who show up. That's all." Arya added, "We don't want to be traded anymore." The judge took a long pause. Then, in words simple but mighty, she gave joint guardianship to Clarice, with Maya to have supervised visits as she continued her recovery. And she named Silas as a formal advocate, with full visitation and emergency authority. It wasn't perfect, but it was safety. It was hope. Epilogue and reflection. Months later, Silas sat in his garden while Celine and Arya raced through the sprinklers, laughing wild and free. Clarice sipped lemonade beside him. Maya, now clean for a year, brought cupcakes on weekends and stayed to help with homework. There were scars, but also something new. Roots. A family, not made by law or money, but by the stubborn, patient act of loving anyway. As I watch these children, on the page and I hope in your imagination, I can't help but ask, how many kids are just waiting for someone to show up and see them? How many families could be rebuilt, not by fixing the past, but by believing in a future worth fighting for? It's never too late to start, even if you're scared, even if you don't know how. What would you do if it were your turn to choose? Would you open your door, risk your comfort, break the rules for someone else's safety? Let me know your thoughts below. If this story touched you, like and subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances. Thank you for listening. See you in the next story.